Roman army took nearly 50 years to work their way up through their new province to what is now Scotland. But they never really conquered these northern tribes, and they remained a thorn in the flesh of Roman Britain. By about AD 120, the northern frontier ranged from Wallsend in the east to Carlisle in the west, and the Emperor Hadrian said, "Build a wall and keep all the others out." This remains the best known frontier anywhere in the Roman world, and it's the perfect place from which to contemplate life at the edge of empire. Hadrian's Wall runs for 73 miles altogether, 80 Roman miles because theirs were a bit shorter than ours, and it takes a wonderfully spectacular route because it follows the line of a natural ridge that runs across the country. You can see that with the northern side of this ridge, which is very steep, it made a formidable barrier to keep out those troublesome tribes from the north who might otherwise have tried to come south and cause trouble. Every mile along the wall there was a little defensive fort. These were called mile castles, and this is Mile Castle 37. These also acted as frontier defence posts because each one had a little gate which allowed people in and out, of course, under Roman control. Along the wall, at irregular intervals of between about 4 and 8 miles, they also built forts. This is one of them, housesteads, perched at the top of a hill. Up to 1,000 troops were stationed here. They were certainly close to the action if any trouble erupted, but living on the wall must have been pretty miserable, especially in winter. The man behind this wall, the Emperor Hadrian, was quite remarkable. He was very enthusiastic about hard work and discipline, and he made a point of walking everywhere to impress the troops and keep up morale. He came here to inspect them all in AD 122. And I suspect that he built this wall partly, of course, to keep out marauding tribes, but partly to keep all those troops occupied. This bit of reconstruction shows the incredible size of the wall when it was first built. 5, 6, even 7 metres high in places. Quite extraordinary. In the middle there's a core of rocks and mortar, and then there's dressed stone on the outside, so the total thickness is 2.5 or even 3 metres. Building it involved moving 2 million tonnes of rocks and soil. Three legions were involved in the construction, each one divided into cohorts and further divided into centuries, each commanded by a centurion. Eventually, there were 15,000 soldiers patrolling this frontier, and you can see evidence of the sheer number of troops at this site. These are the remains of a fort called Arbea, a little south of the wall, across the Tyne in what is now South Shields. It was a supply depot, and this scale model shows the large number of buildings devoted to storing food for the legions stationed along the wall. In those days, of course, there were no potatoes. They didn't come in for hundreds of years, and rice was even later. So what they had mainly was bread, and all of these foundations were granaries filled with hundreds of tons of wheat. They say that the Roman army marched on its stomach, and what that stomach was filled with was bread. The surprising thing is that the soldiers apparently baked the bread themselves, and in a rather unusual way. Archaeologist Alex Kroom, a member of the local reenactors group, has worked out the whole baking process. Alex, can you really make bread without an oven?
Yes, you just create your own little oven within an open fire.
And you get enough heat coming back off the top dish to keep it going?
Yes, if you have enough ashes all around.
It's obviously a lot easier to carry this around than a whole oven, isn't it?
Yes.
So they started then with just plain wheat, which was what was stored in these granaries?
Yes. First of all, you have to pick out all the weed seeds out of there, all the poisonous corn cockle and stuff.
You've done that, have
That's
you?
already been done,
oh,
yes.
Thank goodness, I was
So,
worried.
yeah.
So I can put this straight into the quern and then do a bit of querning.
Yes.
And all the flour just sort of trickles out on the floor. It seems rather odd, that, doesn't it?
It does indeed, yes. We haven't quite worked out why. We find the quern set in the floor of barrack blocks, and as far as you can see, it just gets straight onto the floor and they just collect it from there.
Oh, very bizarre. This is what you get next, yes? This is your sort of granary flour, which has still got a lot of lumps in it.
Yes, so if you were rich and you wanted a nice fine flour, you'd sieve that. So
Okay.
we put it in a linen cloth just as a sieve,
Right.
which is as it.
Oh,
You just fold
hey.
it together and then you just
Gosh,
shake it
that's
out.
very impressive. So this is your mother's pride, is it?
Yes.
I think I'd rather have the granary, actually.
The soldiers most likely did, because you waste a lot getting that fine
Yes.
flour, all the brown stuff you just throw away. So after that, you get the flour and you put it in a mixing bowl,
Right.
like a mortar. We put yeast in. They often use beer to actually get the yeast. And then some sort of fat. Here we're using sort of imported olive oil.
I put olive oil in my bread too. That was normal, was it?
We know that they were given olive oil as a ration, but there's a lot you can do with olive oil, including using it as perfume and washing and stuff. So,
Yes, yes.
and burning it. So.
Yeah.
And then some water,
Right.
and then just mix it up.
Well, that's not very different
Well,
from what I do, so that's all right.
Exactly,
then.
yep.
I'm following Roman tradition.
Alex already has a loaf cooking in her earthenware pot.
How long is it going to take?
Should take about half an hour.
Half an hour. And then we'll have wonderful bread.
Yes,
And we've got some troops to feed it to, have we?
indeed, yes.
At Arbea, they've reconstructed one of the gatehouses to the fort. And here, other members of Alex's group help visitors visualise what life was like for a Roman soldier posted here.
One of the things that fascinates me is that the people who came up here weren't just Romans or Italians, they came from all over the empire. Look at this lovely tombstone here. It commemorates Victor the Moor. He came from Africa. And have a look at this, another tombstone commemorating Regina. Here she is. She died when she was 30 years old. She was originally from a tribe based in St Albans. She was a slave, she got freed, she married her former master, a chap called Barates, and he came from the Syrian desert. As a result, the inscription here is written in Latin, but also in his native tongue, which is Aramaic.
The rebuilt fort at Arbea is a good place to work out defensive tactics that troops would have used here and along Hadrian's Wall. One technique is suggested by a number of shaped stones found here. Archaeologist Bill Griffiths has studied them.
Bill, this just looks like a pile of stones to me.
Well, in a way you're right, but when you look closely at them, you'll see they're actually rounded stones with flattened sides.
Oh, yeah. And you mean these are actually found on sites like this?
Yet they're found on Roman military sites throughout the empire, particularly here at South Shields and at Wallsend Roman Fort as well. And they've been made this shape, partly so you can stack them like this. And for years people thought they were probably for artillery devices. But in fact, we think they're actually a more simple weapon than that. They're simply designed for throwing by hand.
The evidence comes from carved decorations in Rome. These clearly show soldiers throwing stones as they defend the fort at Verona.
What we found with our experiments is using people who dress up as Roman soldiers is without any training they can cover the whole area of the ditches, the whole 30 metres from the fort wall to the outer edge of the outer ditch very easily. And we think that's why the Romans set the ditches at that kind of distance from the fort, so that the weapons could be used on attackers as they're desperately trying to get across the ditch and they maybe can't hold their shields up to protect themselves so easily. The idea is you pick them off as they come through that last killing zone, really.
Certainly one of these landing on your head from this sort of height wouldn't do you any good at all, would it?
Well, you're certainly going to need a couple of aspirin, aren't you?
Yeah, I would have thought so, yes.
The position of the ditch also turns out to be ideal for other weapons. The distance was just right to allow it to be defended by a good throw of a spear. Nearly all armaments and weapons were made with metal, so the blacksmiths had a big part to play. An expert on Roman techniques is David Sim.
If you look at the Roman soldier, almost all of his arms and armour were made of iron. When you've got a vast army, you've got to have a huge number of blacksmiths and iron workers to keep producing the amount that was used.
And presumably a lot of repairs and stuff as well.
Oh yes, not only repairs but replacements. Because if you think of something like a javelin or an arrow or a ballista bolt, it only gets used once.
What David's making is the sharp end for a ballista bolt.
Hot enough?
Yep.
Okay, let's see you finish that arrowhead. You've got 3 minutes and 10 seconds. More
To
heat?
go back. Yes, please.
What other sorts of things do they make apart from weapons?
If you think about almost all of the domestic instruments that we've got today, pots, pans, knives, all the domestic things were all made of iron.
Yes.
Door hinges, door frames, window catches, horse fittings, fittings for carts. Anything that was available really up until the 19th century that was made in iron, then the Romans had the same kind of thing. Nails by the million.
Yes.
On almost every site that's excavated, nails are the most common find. Okay, I think we're about ready.
Having shaped the sharp end, David starts flattening out the metal to create the socket for the wooden shaft.
Now it's got to go back in the fire again.
Right.
Even though David can knock up an arrowhead in a few minutes, it would have taken an awful lot of blacksmiths to supply the needs of all the troops up here, defending the Age of Empire.
There you are.
So that's the final stages then.
Yep, just close that socket up like that.
So all you've got to do now is stick a wooden shaft in
Yes.
there.
Let's see if it fits then. Okay. Yeah. Yep, good fit. That'll do.
Excellent, yeah, that'll be just nice. No problem.
This is Vindolanda Fort, a mile south of the wall, and here in the corner are the commanding officer's quarters. Now, when one of them, a chap called Cerealis, was leaving, he told his servant to burn all the secret papers, and there was a huge bonfire just down there. But when they excavate it, they find underneath a whole lot of stuff that hadn't been burnt, and they found some extraordinary things. Have a look at this. For me, the most extraordinary things were the postcards. They were actually little pieces of wood. Down in the Mediterranean, they would have used papyrus, which they made from the leaves of the plants that grow in Egypt and Sicily. But up here, they couldn't get papyrus, and so they used wood, very, very thin wood, almost like veneer. And they would write messages on one side and the address on the other, just like we would with a postcard. And then sometimes they would fold them over to keep the message secret. Now, most of the postcards they found here were actually messages sent to people in the fort, incoming mail. But also there were some that were copies of letters that they'd sent out. They were office copies. So we have some tantalising glimpses of what life was actually like here in the fort. Unfortunately, the originals are so fragile, they're all at the British Museum.
Written in Latin, of course, the fragments tell us that domestic life in the fort was something we'd recognise. There are orders for foodstuffs, such as chicken, eggs, venison, olives and apples. Oysters are mentioned, a Roman favourite, and pepper, which would have been an expensive luxury up here. There's a request for someone to send hunting nets, probably to bag wild boar, and there's some wonderfully mundane information.
There's an order, for example, for 20 pairs of socks, 2 pairs of sandals and 2 pairs of underpants. It must have been perishing cold up here for those Romans. But my favourite postcard of all is this. Well, this is just a copy of it. It's an invitation to a birthday party, and it came to the commander's wife here, who was called Lepidina, from a lady called Claudia Severa, who was the wife of a commander in some other fort. And what it says is, on the 3rd day before the Ides of September, sister, for the day of the celebration of my birthday, I give you a warm invitation to make sure that you come to us, to make the day more enjoyable for me by your arrival. And just look at the details of this beautiful writing. Now, it's quite clear that some of this writing is very, very regular, and I reckon this must have been dictated to a scribe. It was almost like getting it typed, because then she actually put her own salutation at the end. I shall expect you, sister. Farewell, sister, my dearest soul, as I hope to prosper, and hail. Isn't that lovely?
These messages are a reminder that one of the most important things the Romans brought to Britain was literacy.
That wasn't the only writing system they found here at Vindolanda. They also dug up a whole lot of wax tablets, rather like this one. You see there are two bits of wood hinged with a thick layer of beeswax on the inside of each, so that when you hinge them together, both sides would be protected. Now you would write on one of those with a stylus like this, a metal stylus, and I'm going to write a V for Vindolanda. And you could obviously write notes to other people or notes to yourself. It was like a sort of personal organiser of the 1st century AD. And when you'd finished and you wanted to change it and chuck that bit away, you used the other end as a rubber. You would just scratch over your wax and smooth it out, and you could start again. Very, very neat, a reusable personal organiser. It's obvious that they were really useful for temporary storage, for writing little notes or sending instructions to commanders further down the line. The trouble with messengers was that they could only go as fast as the horses they were riding. And sometimes on this savage frontier, the Romans needed to send back messages very quickly to headquarters to warn that there was an attack going on. So what they used were beacons like this. You see, I've got flags, which of course at night would become flaming torches, and these would be visible for miles across the hills. So it was relatively easy to send a message. But how do you send an actual message? Well, what I've got here is two groups, okay? There are 5 here, and there are 5 here. So I've got 2 groups of 5, and I've got the whole alphabet written down here on a sort of crib sheet. So suppose I want to send the letter B, that's in column 2, or II, and in row I. That means I have to lift 2 flags on that side, and 1 on this side, and that'll be the letter B. Now, I need a bit of assistance. Paul, can you give me a hand? On command, can you pull 1 down? 1, 2, 3, go! Right, we're now sending the letter B, and if they're awake over there on that hill, they'll be wondering what on earth it's about. Fortunately, I've got a real expert here, David. David Wallace-Croft knows all there is to know about Roman signalling. David, is this really something like they might have used?
This is an exact replica of a system we know from a Roman period historian.
So would they have signalled here from Castle 37?
This is just the sort of place they do signal from. And the nearest fort to us is Vindolanda, which is about 3 miles in that direction.
But you can't see that, so you can't signal there.
You can't see Vindolanda directly, it's in a hollow, but what you can see is a dark hill in the middle distance about 2 miles away called Barcum, and there's long been known to be a Roman watchtower on that hill, which acts as a relay. That site can see us here and can see Vindolanda.
So you think this was deliberately sited here to send messages to Barcum?
Yes.
And then on to Vindolanda?
Yes, we've in fact found that virtually every single castle and turret on the wall either can directly see a fort or can see one of these relay towers.
Oh, really? You mean you've been the whole way along and checked?
More or less.
Oh, that's amazing. Right, now do you think this will still work?
I certainly hope so.
OK, so if you have the assistance of Paul here and I go down the hill, can you send me a message?
We'll give it a try.
OK, well, I'll need the crib sheet, won't I? Otherwise I won't understand. Cheers. Right, this should do it. Now, there they are up on the hill. All I need to do is to get them signalling. OK. Right, we've got a 3 and a 2. 3 and 2, that's H. And now we've got a 5 and a 1. 5 and a 1, that's E.
Up.
Now we've got a 2 and a 3. 2 and 3 is L. H, E, L.
Up.
And a 1 and a 4. H, E, L, P. They want help. Well, there's not much help I can give them, but maybe I should send them a message, at least to cheer them up a bit. One of the problems with that sort of signalling is that it required me to count the number of flags, which is actually quite difficult to see from this distance. You can't resolve them easily. So I'm going to send a signal back that depends not on counting, but on timing. And because of that, I've got my clock here. This is a primitive sort of Roman clock, which is basically just an amphora full of water. There's a cork in the bottom here, and when I pull the cork out, this float will gradually sink down as the water runs out, and so all these numbers in turn will come opposite this pointer. And I simply note what number it is, the message I want to send, and then I make a signal. So here is my cue, you see, so send supplies, all clear, stand down. How about cavalry troop dispatch? That'd cheer them up, wouldn't it? So that's number V, so I have to wait until this is sunk down to V, and then I give them the stop signal.
David has an identical water clock, which he'll set off at exactly the same moment as mine when I give them a start signal with my flaming torch.
Now I'm going to hold it down below this barrier so they can't see it for the moment. What I need to do is to hold it up to make sure they're awake, and then when they've lifted theirs, I'll drop it and at the same time whip out the bung out of my amphora. Now then, just get ready with the bung. Okay, up with the beacon.
Okay, signalling, acknowledge.
There, they've lifted theirs, they're watching. So now we'll go 1, 2, 3, down and out with the cork. Go. Boom. And now I've just got to wait until this gets down to V, because that's the message I want to send. Aye, aye, aye. IV. Here we go. 3, 2, 1, go!
Okay, signalling answering.
Okay.
Right.
There, they've lifted theirs. They should have got the message.
Well, we've got number 5.
David, did you get my message?
Yeah, but where's the cavalry I was promised?
Well, they probably stopped for a tea break. You know what they're like.
Although that technology was primitive, the principles of the Roman codes are still used in electronic communications today.
With 176 public holidays a year coupled with our blighty weather, how did the Romans keep themselves amused? More from Adam Hart-Davis next.